Welcome back to another episode of the Lofty Lenders Homebuyer Education, where we explore tips, tricks, and stories that can help you plan for your next home purchase. Whether you're a first-time buyer, a move-up buyer, an investor, or just looking to learn, we hope you gain a little bit of knowledge today. Today's topic is one that many people have heard about on social media but don't really understand, which is house hacking. Can you really buy a home and save money while also having another person pay for your mortgage? Charlie, is that even legal? Is it practical? Is
I got
it
my wife to pay for
possible?
mine.
Yeah, let's say your wife is your hacker.
Wouldn't that be great? It is possible, but I just don't like the way they frame it because it sounds bad. It just sounds like you're doing something illegal, but it's pretty cool when you can get somebody who's going to cover part of your overhead, get a duplex, get a threeplex, get a roommate. You bet.
One of the biggest barriers, I think, to home ownership at this point in time is just affordability, right? The incomes haven't been keeping up with how fast prices have been rising on homes. And so, even thinking about my kids down the road, should I be buying a house right now so that I can, save it as an investment property, and then my kids will have a house to live in, but my kids probably won't want to live in that one house that I help buy for them 20 years before. So,
Yeah. That's funny because right before we started this, I said we're getting an apartment for our daughter. And I've been thinking for a month, I'm like, oh, do we just buy a house and let her rent from us? There's lots of things to consider, so it's not something to jump into quickly, but I love the idea. You just got to make sure it's the right setup, right?
she could totally buy it as her primary residence, even though she's not working, Charlie. And
Yep.
then you wouldn't have her renting, right? She would just be paying you back as you're helping out. And, when she moves on, you can take that and turn it into a rental, especially if it's going to be next to a college anyways.
Yep. And this is exactly, we're off track, but at the same time, we're on track. This is
house hacking.
exactly what we want everybody to talk about because my logic in this is I just want her to cut her teeth. Like, I don't want to give her a house first. Like, we literally just hung up and we're getting gated. It's got a pool and a business center and a workout facility. And I'm like, no, the laundry's in her space. And I'm like, this is great. No, you're going to college. Why is it so pretty and nice? But it's $100 more than next to a bar, not safe. So we're running that back and forth, just like we're talking about. It's like, do we buy something and let her have it? I'm going to let her cut her teeth first, make sure she wants to stay in Omaha. And that way we don't have to lose money selling a house in 1 year because it's hard to make money on a house in 1 year. But that's a great question because I would love, if she's going to stay there, let's just get her a house next year. So we're going to sign a 12-month lease, but we're crunching the numbers just for this exact reason because we're going to pay $12,000, a little more, just for her to rent. And we would love to see most people put that towards a house. It's way better spent.
Yeah, I think many buyers look at monthly payments right now and they think, I can't afford that, or I need to make more money first, or maybe I'll just keep renting like your daughter. But, the point of today's episode is, what if you could generate income to offset some of that monthly payment or even most of that monthly payment? I know me personally, I've come across several people over the years that have either bought a single family home and then they rented out the basement, or they rented out an upper level, or they rented out a bedroom, and they use that income to offset their monthly payment. I know one guy, he bought a property. He had his brother living with him. He had his brother paying, what he thought was half the rent or half the mortgage payment. Turns out it was a little bit more, but that's because, he's like, well, if my brother's going to live with me, I might as well make some money on this. And he's got a better job than I do anyway, so we might as well take advantage of that. So he just looked at it from the standpoint of, how do I give him something he needs, which is a place to live? I know I love my brother. I know I want to be around him. But at the same time, I can offset my monthly payment and not have that be so expensive.
I love it. And especially like if it's someone you've known, family member, friend, college, whatever. My first place was a duplex. I loved it. I rented out the bottom for a little more than half, but I also had a roommate. Typically, I think I had it like 2.5, 3 years. I had a couple roommates. I didn't have anything for an expense at that point. It was great. But you got to be able to be comfortable with, like you said, the risk. I had to pay it no matter what. But as long as I knew that, all the money coming in, totally offset. So it can be such a good idea as long as, it's going to actually have the money flow. and you like the area, you're going to stay there long enough. But I love the idea of having income to offset roommates, duplex, whatever the case may be. It's a heck of a way to get in. Just got to talk it through.
All right. So, what is house hacking? House hacking simply means buying a property that you live in while also generating income from it. Some common examples include purchasing a duplex, as Charlie was just talking about, renting out the other side, buying a triplex or a fourplex and living in one unit. There are different programs out there that allow you to, put down 5% on a primary purchase of a duplex, for example, and you're not having to come up with these large down payments on the duplex now. And how you can rent out that other side and, offset your monthly payment. Other examples are renting out a basement apartment, renting a spare bedroom, building an ADU or accessory dwelling unit. Those are starting to become more and more popular,
There. Yeah.
or renting out, part of the property on a short-term basis. So that's really what we're talking about when it comes to house hacking. I'm sure there are other definitions and whatnot out there, but really the goal is simple. Reduce your housing expense by turning your home into an income producing asset. If you ever have read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, one of the things that Robert Kiyosaki, I think that's how you say it, says is your home is a liability. It's not an asset. And most people think, well, my home is my biggest asset, right? Well, if you're making mortgage payments, you're making property tax payments, you're paying homeowners insurance, and you're not making any money from it, it really isn't an asset. It really is a liability. It's great to have a home. Everybody wants to live in a house, but that's my biggest liability, not really my biggest asset.
Yeah, it's long term. I mean, when we have it, you're going to have cash flow, you're going to have assets that are liquid, semi liquid. The house really is not liquid. So it's a great long term asset. But in the short term, if you're overcommitting, especially, it's a liability. You got to make sure that budget's right. And I think what you're talking about and what we're talking about is how do you offset some of that liability so that way now it is an income producing and you can help facilitate budget, whatever the case may be. If you can offset all of it, that'd be awesome. But when you were in school, did you have any off campus? Were you all dorm?
So I transferred schools after my freshman year. I was campus the first year for basketball. Second year, I was on campus. Loris required that. Third year, I got into some on campus housing with a couple of foreign exchange students, which was actually a ton of fun until they like to party so much until like 4 a.m. and my basement just reeked of stale beer. And, that was a whole other topic. But I eventually moved out and lived with just another guy off campus for a while in an apartment. But I was his way of offsetting his rent. So I was paying his mortgage for him, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and then it even can be done on a rental, kind of a first step getting used to being a landlord. You could rent a 2-bedroom. You're the only one on the lease, and then you rent to somebody else. And, they're not obligated. They're obligated to you, but that's it. So you can kind of take that baby step in there. But I was always surprised when I was at school down at Simpson, Dad had a lot of rental properties. We never looked at a rental property down in Indianola. It always surprised me because Dad had a couple duplexes and a lot of single families, but he never wanted to go outside of Waukee. Indianola is close, just not that close. So it's always interesting, but that's that comfort level. You've got to figure out what's right for you, but there is some pretty cool options. And I think that's the whole point for today. Don't assume you have to float it all by yourself. There are ways to get you in cheaper, still cautious with the risk, but have a good safety net. It's a great way to start growing a portfolio and build some wealth.
Yeah. So what do you think the biggest misconception is of that people have on house hacking?
I think a lot of lately is too much for expectations. I think when the house hacking, I see most people think I can level up 2 spots and I can start up here. That concerns me because the house hacking isn't meant to necessarily level you up when you're starting, maybe down the road. It's meant to break down that barrier. And so you can have more income besides your job because sometimes, if you're in sales or something, you can maybe, dictate your income and say, hey, I'll work some overtime. I can put extra time in to get those concessions or the commissions in or the tips in or whatever you're doing, side gigs. But most people don't have a lot of variable on their income, especially when you're starting out. And so a totally different stream, which then we get into that, roommate or becoming your first step into a landlord where you're receiving that rental income or shared expense. So I think really fair expectations is the first hurdle. And a lot of it is kind of like when you're buying the car too. If you go for the fancy car first, everything else is harder. If you go for the modest car first, everything else is still on the table and you can have a good mix of everything, not just one thing awesome and then, forget the rest.
So, can first time home buyers actually use low down payment options for financing a house that you can then use for house hacking?
I love that idea. And I say, how many do you think you've done? I know I've done a few that have done duplexes or threeplexes. And I've had a couple that are, they did have a roommate in mind, but we did the approval on just them. But it hasn't been as many as I really would have thought over the last few years.
Yeah, I feel like oftentimes people get a little anxious about that other unit, and I don't have it rented right now, so I'm a little anxious about can I get it rented and can we get somebody in there? The nice thing about some of these loan programs is they're going to use the average rent if we don't have a lease agreement established potentially. So depending on the program, you might be able to get away with using just the average rents, which allows us to then say, well, you don't have to have a renter in there today. You want to get one in there soon, right? But now let's get that property, get you into one side of it. I think a lot of times people just don't want to share a wall. I
Yeah.
hear that a lot as well.
Yeah.
Me personally, I rented out my basement. I had a time where my best man from my wedding,
Nice.
his sister was in town and she was doing school at one of the Des Moines universities. And she's like, I just need a place to stay. I was like, great. You got the basement. You can have access to the kitchen or whatever. You eat our food. I just ask that you watch my kids once in a while. I mean, I feel like it's a fair trade off. And we got a couple of times out of her, but ultimately it was pretty normal. My wife was a little worried, having a young college girl in our house. But she's very quiet. She kept to herself. We got money out of it every single month. I knew that it was guaranteed money because it was her parents that were paying, and I knew her parents well, so I wasn't worried about that. It was really nice, and we just got to pay down on our mortgage right away. We didn't do anything with it other than make a little bit of money, save a little bit of interest.
Yeah. And I think one of the ones that I see the most success with is typically, hey, Kyle and I have been roommates forever. He doesn't want to buy a house because he's nervous, but I'll buy the house, but I'll still rent to Kyle. You can have that prearranged with somebody you already know or somebody that it may not be with you already, but they might want to. So you can buy a little bit more home, not crazy, but if you wanted a one bedroom for yourself, then great, go for the two bedroom and you can get that roommate that has some consistency with you and you know where they're at in life. A whole random new person, especially renting out of your own space versus a duplex. It's different. You gotta decide what's right for you. Share the wall, share the hallway, whatever the case may be.
And I think another reason that I haven't seen a ton of this is because a lot of the duplexes, triplexes, quads, they have some issues. They need to be fixed up. And FHA does allow for 3.5% down for up to a 4 unit property as long as you're buying one unit as your primary residence. And so that's really nice. But if the other 3 units are not rentable and you can't get a tenant in there, I mean, most people can't qualify for a 4 unit property that want to buy a 4 unit property without those other 3 units being rented right away. So we need to see that there's rent coming from those units. And if they're not in a great state, it makes it a lot harder for us to see a lot of those.
It
But I,
does.
I have seen a couple people try, and then they got to the inspection and they're like, this property is better off being torn down than it is to be purchased.
And that's hard because there's not as many new ones. There are some. It depends on the area. Like around us, Urbandale has a decent number of duplexes. There's a lot of them by me and a couple certain, but those are old. Where you're getting in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. If they're maintained, they're fine. But just like you said, the deferred maintenance can be tricky. I'm a bigger fan of roommates. I mean, if you can do that to start, and then they're going to go out someday and you're going to want that space someday. So it's a nice way to get a primary residence and have a roommate in there. Some people just aren't up to being a true landlord and, you've got to have rental certificates. There's more when it's a separate unit, but it just depends on what you want. And like you said, do you have the desire to do any fixes? Got any spare money to do those fixes? Hopefully there's some family that are handy.
I've got a friend of mine who goes to my church, and he was talking about how he bought his first house. He fixed it up, got it all ready to go. And then he went out and bought another house and he turned around and rented that one out. And then he did the same thing again. And after about two or three of those, they finally said, okay, we've got enough money saved up from the equity we've been able to, make on all these different properties from the income coming in each month from rental that we're then able to use that as a down payment on the next property. And so I think he's up to 7 or 8 rentals in total, and most of them are Airbnb, so he's getting quick money fast. And I mean, it's great for him because I mean, he touts all the time that he's retired at 29. I think he's just got a different career, but he's sure he's retired. But he did the house hacking opportunity, right? He found a way to make money from his property. They just needed a little TLC first. He went in there and he fixed them up.
And that's a really good example of the right expectation. Because if he would have had the expectation of the house he wants, he never would have got to 7. Because you would have gone 1, 3, or 4, 7. Because as you do this, you've got to upgrade. Because underwriting doesn't think you're going to go from 1,200 square feet down to 800 square feet. They know you're flipping these things into rentals. So you've got to be able to upgrade each time. So there's some technicalities, but his expectation was, okay, this isn't my long term. I'm just going to take what I can and build my portfolio. That's a great idea. So he's sacrificing a little bit, but he probably didn't sacrifice that much. But part of the plan is key.
Yep, absolutely. So when you're finding yourself on asking yourself whether or not you can make this payment, think about, is there a way that maybe somebody can help me offset this monthly payment? Is there a room in our house that we can rent out? Is there somebody we know personally that is needing a place to stay? People, unfortunately, we're seeing it all the time, but right now we're seeing a lot of people going through a divorce. There's probably somebody who's going through a divorce that may need a place to stay. You might be the perfect place to land as just having somebody around, being helpful, and also being able to collect a few months of rent out of that as well.
Yeah. And some of the short term is fantastic. Getting short term rental, again, back to my daughter, they were looking at, you could do 3 months and it's $1,600 a month. If you did 13 months, it was $890 a month. Like, holy cow, it's almost double to do a 3-month rental. So, traveling nurses, our neighbor did that. It was great. 6 months. If you didn't like the person, they were gone in 6 months.
All right. So we are going to get into the 3 actionable takeaways. Number 1 is explore your local housing options. Take a look and see if you have any duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, homes with finished basements, separate entrances, lots of extra rooms, whatever. Look at all your different options that are out there. Number 2, talk to a mortgage professional early. We always say this, but it's really important, especially when you're looking into house hacking. Not every property is going to qualify for every loan program that's out there. Some people come to me and say, "Well, Kyle, I want to go conventional, but I want to buy a 4-unit property, and I only have a few $1,000s to put down." Unfortunately, that's not possible. So there's just different nuances with those programs, but it's important to look at that. And we're only talking about conventional type loan programs out there. There are so many other programs out there that can help with house hacking. So definitely good to talk to a lender and explore your options. And finally, 3, run the numbers before you fall in love, especially when you start to look at your home as an asset. You start looking at it of, how can I make money on this property? And am I going to be able to rent it out to offset my monthly payment enough so that I can then go and do something else? People don't do a house hack and make it uncomfortable by having somebody live with you if you're not planning to do something with that extra money or planning to have a bigger goal. I just went to a conference recently and it just reminded me to dream bigger. There's always a reason to dream bigger, because if I don't hit that ultimate goal, maybe I can settle for half of that goal and it's still going to be way better than what I dreamt before. So dream bigger. That's really the most important number 3, I think. So today we discussed one of the most powerful strategies available to first-time buyers and aspiring investors, which is house hacking. We covered what house hacking is, different ways to generate income for your property, financing options available, why many successful investors get started this way, and how rental income can improve your affordability. So remember, your home can be more than just a place to live. It can be a stepping stone toward long-term financial freedom. We hope you gained a little bit of knowledge today, enjoyed the conversation, and found it valuable. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms and subscribe to the podcast for more exciting episodes. And remember, stay curious. We'll see you next week on The Lofty Lender.